welcome to Garage Theology for another session looking at Mark's Gospel in Lent. This afternoon we're looking at Mark 10:35 to 45, whilst continuing to mark up the legs of this piece of what will hopefully eventually become a bunk bed. So Mark 10:35 to 45 is slightly difficult passage for fans of James and John. They only get one outing on their own in Mark's Gospel, and this is it. And it's not the best from their point of view. Essentially, what happens is that Jesus in Mark 10 is travelling from the north of Judea down to Jerusalem, and on his way he is teaching his disciples about what it means to follow him and be his disciple. And he's just in the verses just before verse 35, he's been teaching them about the requirement of his disciples, before his disciples, to be people who, he's been saying to them that he's going to go to Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem that he'll be put to death. And so we have this image, the requirement that his disciples are people who are as committed as that, who are willing to put everything into following him. And James and John, having heard Jesus talk about how he's going to go to Jerusalem and he's going to lose his life to the leaders, well, they respond with a fairly audacious request. They come up to Jesus and they say to him, "Teacher," which is like a compliment, "we want you to do for us whatever we ask." I mean, I don't know if you've ever had someone come up to you and say, "Would you mind just, signing this check? I'll fill in the amount of money on it later." And it's quite audacious as a request to say to someone, do something even if I won't tell you what it is I'm going to ask. Put that bit of mark in the wrong place. There, and there, and there. Just marking out where I'm going to take the joints from and which bits I'm going to keep and which bits are not going to be kept. And this marks how far down it's going to go. The idea is that by taking all the measurements from one block, all the joints are consistent. We'll see whether that works later. And so we have James and John make this audacious request to Jesus that he would do whatever they ask. And being sensible, Jesus doesn't just say, "Oh yeah, of course I'll do whatever you ask." And so they say, "We'd like you, when you come into your glory, for us to sit at your right and your left hand." So they're saying, Jesus, when you become really powerful, because in their mind Jesus is going to Jerusalem to take the throne and to be the next king, because they've just seen Jesus transfigured on the mountaintop, and they're all in believing that Jesus is about to take sort of power from the Romans and establish his kingdom on earth. And so they'd like to be a big part of that. They'd like to have their thrones next to Jesus's. And I can't get over the gall of it. It keeps on coming to me. Chances are Mark was speaking, Gospel of Mark was Peter's eyewitness account. That's where it's... And you can see why Peter would remember this happening. Two of his closest friends going to Jesus and saying, "Could we be the closest people to you?" And leave Peter, who's sort of the other person in that group of four, completely out of it. And I found myself asking again and again, why is it that James and John are asking this? Why are they being quite so callous and unfeeling? Is it that they just want to be close to Jesus? I mean, that seems like a very generous interpretation of their actions. And it seems to me more that Peter and James are just so focused on being at the centre of everything, so focused on that possibility of glory and power, that they stop thinking about who they're talking to and the effects of what they're doing. They're so convinced that they're right, that they deserve this position, that everything else just disappears from their minds. And you think, how tragic is that? How sad that, they've endangered all those friendships because they felt they were right and they were entitled. There's a real warning there for us to think about what we're doing, about are we losing something good and meaningful because we're convinced we're right. So they make this audacious request, and Jesus responds, I'd say really lovingly, because they don't really know what they're doing. And Jesus says, you do not know what you're asking. Can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I'm going to be baptized with? And cup is Old Testament imagery for judgment, and baptism is a word for being entirely sort of enveloped within, overwhelmed by, immersed in. So he's sort of saying, are you prepared to suffer the judgment I'm going to suffer and be overwhelmed by what's going to overwhelm me, to be consumed by what's going to consume me? And James and John have this nickname of Sons of Thunder, and they completely go all in with their Sons of Thunder identity, and just like, yeah, don't need to tell us what it is, we'll do it. And Jesus says, yep, you will. But to sit in my right hand and my left hand isn't for me to decide. Those seats have already been allocated. Maybe it'll be you, maybe it'll be someone else. Revelation 7 rather implies that it'll be martyrs. And then when Jesus has spoken to them, it seems that the other disciples pick up on what has been going on. They hear what James and John have been saying or asking. And these power struggles have been going on for a while amongst them. This desire to be number one has been going on for a while. And so Jesus decides now is the time to deal with it and to speak into it. And he starts by reminding them of the way the Gentiles behaved. So the Gentiles, the Romans, the Greeks, and I think probably by implication, this is human nature since the fall, have sought to exert dominance, to see power and value as analogous, that the things to strive for most consistently in life is to have power, and to have that power equate as your value. VIP tickets. They don't go to baristas and waiters, they go to MPs and industrialists. We equate power with value. And Jesus, who is, the source of all power, the creator of all existence, starts to teach them though that the value is in service. That those who want to be the most significant need to be the most faithful in their service. And this is completely counter any human culture. From kids in school sat around. I used to be a secondary school teacher. There's no doubt that it's viewed as and understood that the best place to be is the dominant person in a group. And here's Jesus teaching this ethic of no, don't seek dominance, think to be servants. And it makes about as much sense as Jesus teaching that camels can go through the eye of needles. I mean, he doesn't really teach that they can, he's just making it funny. But it seems like Jesus is in a mood to make statements that are so obviously unlikely. And yet he says this statement about leadership in the present tense, but not so with you. And there's no, it shouldn't be or it won't be, because it's not. Just trying to get these lined up properly. Don't want a wonky bed. You know, it says that in the church, it shouldn't be that the most powerful are given the most value. I mean, I would say there's a strong chance that in the Church of England at least, there is an implicit and common equating of value with authority, that those who sit the highest in places of leadership are given the most value. It happens to me. Some people think my opinion matters because of the position I am in, and there's always that question of, am I treating that responsibility well? Am I honouring that position? And I guess that's why Paul in his letters is quite keen that those in leadership take that responsibility seriously, that understand that we will be judged more carefully because of the responsibility and the position that we're given. Jesus goes on to say that, let's read it all the way through, not so with you, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, whoever wants to be first must be a slave of all. This image of the being owned by those we wish to serve, which I should say is probably not just the people who sit in church on a Sunday morning, because that's not who you're trying to serve alone. Whoever the church is trying to serve have this ownership over those who are trying to serve them, which should sound a little shocking. I think Jesus means that to be a stand up and take notice type statement. And I just sort of finished looking at this passage, thinking about what it is being Lent and building up to Easter, and Jesus finishes this teaching by saying, for not even the Son of Man came to be served, but to serve and give up his life as a ransom for many. This image of Jesus dying on the cross at Easter, not to glorify himself, but to buy us back from the judgment for our sins. That we who were once lost in sin are now set free because he's paid the price for us. And that at Easter there's a real need to think about how that gift of life, that being ransomed, how does it affect our choices, our sense of being called to serve rather than being called to dominate? Are there times when we choose our own selfish self-interest rather than the interests of those we're meant to be putting before our own? Lent is a good time to think about that, so that when Easter comes, we can appreciate more fully what's been bought for us. That's all for today. See you next time for more on Mark. Goodbye.